Well, yeah, and thanks, Marcity. Lovely introduction. I like that phrase, yeah, a good friend is a blessing in your life. I certainly felt that about having Marcity in my life. So, yes, I came up with a rather big title because Maitrisara said just calling things right emotion or right speech didn't seem to be drawing in the crowd. She said, can we come up with something with a bit more zap, I think. So I came up with Love, Life and Death, working on mental health frontline during the Covid-19 pandemic. But I thought I was going to be giving a sort of 40-minute talk, and I've only got about 20 minutes. So I've been editing madly. And I wanted to, people seem to like to get into discussion groups, which I think is very good. So I'm going to try and allow time for the discussion groups. So it's going to be a bit of an essentialized talk. And I wanted to try and make it relevant to, everybody. And because it's a process which has been going on in me, which I think has sort of come to fruition in doing the work I do, which actually began with, a sort of perfect vision experience when I was much younger. And in some ways, I've sort of fallen into doing the work I do by chance. It's not something I planned on doing. But I won't give the full story. But it's something which I think budded or started to bud in quite early life. And I think it does relate to the theme, looking at the Noble Eightfold Path, the emphasis that's put on the first stage, perfect vision. Having some sort of glimpse that there is more to life, some sort of insight into what life is in terms of its defects, its limitations, its lack of fulfillment, maybe, and wanting more, wanting whatever it may be. It can be very personal. You can see, wanting more freedom, wanting there to be more love in the world, wanting to live in a different kind of world. And I think last week we spoke a bit about dreams, didn't you? And that's the way Sangha actually introduces this topic of right livelihood, that everybody dreams. And I think we do all dream, and we do all daydream, and we do, everybody here certainly, or everybody at home as well, that you wouldn't be here unless you had some sort of vision of, life can be better than it is. So I was going to talk a bit about my own journey and how I've ended up doing what I'm doing and my own sort of glimpses of that. It will be a bit truncated, but I hope it can spark a bit of discussion. Because I particularly want to bring out the sort of altruistic dimension of these glimpses, because I think very often they're spoken of quite cognitively in terms of sort of wisdom aspects, or seeing the limitations or the faults. But very often within that, or part of that, is a desire to change things, to change the world. And we very much, the world is made up of other people, so it's changing the way one relates and interacts with other people. But I'm going to begin with a quote by Sangha, which has partly sort of sparked this thinking in me, or a bit of revisioning of my own life. And this is a quote from Sangha when he's talking about an aspect of mindfulness called sampajana. You may know that there's quite a few dimensions to mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't just about sort of being present in your experience. There's this aspect called sampajana, which is rather badly translated as continuity of purpose, which I certainly do it. I think in terms of sort of keeping an awareness of what you need to do each day. It's like keeping your tick box list in mind, but it's much more to it than that. And I think this quote sort of brings out another aspect of sampajana. You could say it's keeping true to that sort of those glimpses we have of perfect vision. It's keeping an awareness of those. So now our experiences of perfect vision are us at our best. It's us having a bit of wisdom, and we're trying to keep those experiences in mind. So sampajana is a way of sort of cultivating those experiences, so we actually start living them out in our very lives. So this is Sangha in one of the seminars talking about Sampajana. Even hearing about the lives of ordinary Buddhists can leave one with a distinct impression that their progress towards the spiritual path was inevitable, as though there was a goal implicit in everything they did, a goal that gradually became clearer to them as they experienced more of life and realized what they really wanted to be and do. You might not realize the path your life is taking until you look back on it. But when you do become aware of your purpose, it might seem uncannily as though your life has had a direction of its own, independent of your conscious volition. As that direction emerges into consciousness, with the arising of some degree of clear comprehension, it is intensified and you can pursue it even more vigorously. This might provoke considerable resistance within you. But when you become aware of your higher purpose, you will never be able to forget it entirely. So I'll read that again at the end, because there's quite a bit in there, I think. But looking at that made me revision my own life to some extent. So as Marcity mentioned, I've ended up working on the mental health frontline during the COVID pandemic, and it's been pretty intense, full-on work, and there's been a lot going on, as I'm sure everybody can imagine. That quite a few people who didn't have mental health problems have been drawn into it because their life has changed quite considerably. And those with mental health issues already present, well, they haven't been able to access the services that they normally access to keep them sort of on the straight and narrow. So they've been, relapsing. So a lot of people have been tipping over into crisis, and there's been a big surge in suicide cases and people who are in danger of suicide. So when COVID happened, I worked for Birmingham Mind, and we started working with the NHS, providing mainly a service over the phone because we couldn't do face-to-face work. So yeah, we are the sort of the way of accessing any mental health services is through the helpline. That's both NHS mental health services, but we also we try and offer something a bit alternative as well. So we don't just put people into the NHS and seeing psychiatrists and usually going down the path of medication. We try and offer things like counselling and mindfulness. And being a good Buddhist, I've been particularly plugging mindfulness because I think it can really help with any form of mental health condition, as long as it's not too severe. So it's a good thing in many ways that there's more available to people. They're not just given drugs and seeing a psychiatrist once every 6 months. There's more available. And I'll say a bit more about that work later, but as I said, I've sort of found myself doing what in some ways I've always wanted to do, which sounds a bit perverse because it's meeting a lot of suffering, but I found it sort of brought out the qualities in me which I sort of knew were there, but I don't think they'd really found expression in the way that I thought they needed more expression. Because Marcity mentioned I've been given this big name, the Diamond Thunderbolt of Compassion. But I always had this sense, well, when am I going to actually start living that out a bit more? And, starting to work on this helpline, I started to find, well, I did have those qualities, and I was able to meet people with compassion and have the sort of resilience and energy to keep doing it, call after call, day after day. So yeah, that's what I've been doing, but I can sort of trace it back that it's something which, as I said, started to bud quite early in life. And there was a couple of events, sort of perfect vision experiences that I had when I was a teenager. And I found out the other day, I was looking these things up on the internet, that there were two things that really affected me when I was 15. And both of them came into the UK. I use that expression, the UK, because one of them actually been in America on the same day. And they're completely different sort of cultural events. The first one was the first screening of Roots back in 1977. On the 8th of April 1977, this mini-series, I think one of the first mini-series called Roots, was screened on British television. And some commentators think it was the most important television event ever. And it really affected me. I think because it had quite a lot of publicity, that it was not the normal sort of thing I'd watch. But for those who don't know, it's based on a book by Alex Haley, who traced his heritage back to slavery in West Africa. So it's a story telling how his ancestors were taken as slaves and brought over to America. And as a 15-year-old, I found it deeply, deeply shocking that a human being or human beings could be so cruel to other human beings. And I think initially, I think it was particularly the episode where it talks about how they were brought across on this long sea journey, just shackled in these tiers. And those, they weren't allowed to move or given any exercise or anything. And those at the bottom just got all the excrement of the ones on top landing on them. And I just couldn't imagine anything more inhuman. And it was sort of anticipated that, a certain percentage would die, but that was okay. So I found that deeply, deeply shocking. And it made, I think as a teenager, you start becoming aware more of the world around you. And I thought, well, I can't live in a world like that. It just seems so unjust and so unfair. And I wanted to live in a world which was, more just and more fair. But how to do that? But there was a strong aspiration, I know, in response to that I didn't want to live in that sort of world. I didn't want to live like that as a human being. I think there's also an awareness in that human beings could be so much better. So that came out in the UK. It was first screened in America earlier in the year, but on the 8th of April 1977. And this is a slightly different cultural phenomenon, but again, it happened on the 8th of April 1977, probably before quite a few of you were born. But The Clash released their first album. And that changed my life as well. The energy in The Clash's first album was saying no to conventional life. It wasn't particularly saying yes to anything, but it was really strongly saying no, and you don't have to do this. And it's stifling and it's boring and it's, well, as the punks would say, it's probably something a bit stronger. But the energy in that music, I found so attractive. I just thought, yes. And one apocryphal story that I heard later was the Buddhist centre up in Glasgow used to be run by a bunch of order members who were pretty wild. Quite a few of them had come from the Glasgow gangs. And the story goes, before they did an introductory class at the centre, they used to put the Clash first album on. And I thought, yes, that's the energy to, start taking the Dharma out into the world, to have that, yes, we're going to change the world. And when I came along in the early 80s, there was still that energy around the movement that, the Dharma is radical. It's not all about having a peaceful time, on your cushion. This is about trying to transform, the world. We've got something we've got values here, which, if other people sort of get it, we could create a different world. So it's part of a sort of counterculture. And unfortunately, that energy isn't quite, so present. It's still present in some places. It's probably still present at Buddhafield, where there's a bit of a counterculture going on there. But on the whole, as we've become more established, we've in some ways become a bit conventional. And well, I'm certainly one of the people who would say, well, yes, let's keep being, spreading the radical message. Let's still keep hearing about what Dr. Ambedkar did in India, what can be done to society, what we can do, how we can live, how we can relate to one another. So it was that when I was 15, those were, I remember, big experiences, seeing Roots on television and The Clash and punk and being part of it, wanting to be part of a counterculture and wanting to do something different. And yeah, it's been quite a zigzag path. And I was interested in that quote that other aspects of your being can really resist that aspiration. It requires a lot of personal transformation. And many a time I've wanted to put myself in a position where I can do more for others, just to keep hitting my own limitations and find, well, I can't, I haven't got the resources. What tends to happen to me is I tend to burn out or get ill. But so for the first time, I found myself in a demanding situation, high demand for mental health services, a lot of people coming at you in various, states of emotional distress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of grief, a lot of panic, a lot of pain, just emotional and psychological pain, a lot of hopelessness and despair, a lot of frustration with the lack of help that they can access. So all that's coming at you, and you try and meet it. So it's a bit like doing. I was going to say it's a bit like doing the neutral stage of the metta bhavana, but it's in some ways it's more the fourth stage, that you're getting people coming at you with emotions where a strong human response would be, I don't think I want to go there. So it was very good practice in terms of metta bhavana to just keep trying to meet that, and as a good metta bhavana practitioner, looking after oneself as well. So you don't get martyred or tendency to fall into just doing yourself in. And at times I found it incredibly rewarding. I'll sort of bring out a couple of the highlights because it sounds a bit horrific. I mean, sometimes I've described the work I do and people say, well, that's my definition of hell. I just couldn't do what you're doing. And I say, well, I must be weird because, I can love it. I can have days where, I was going to draw this out that you've probably heard this, that, when metta meets suffering, it becomes karuna, it becomes compassion. And that was certainly my experience on the line, that you empathize with people, you feel for them, and you try and respond out of that to try and help them. So I can meet a lot of suffering during the day, and then at the end of the day, when I stopped taking the calls, I hadn't experienced it this way, but when metta is no longer meeting suffering, karuna comes back to being metta. And cycling home, I could feel so connected to life and others, just with all this love in my heart. So I hadn't felt like, God, that was a really hard day. I had to deal with a lot of suffering. It was like, I'd had a really hard day. I'd met a lot of suffering, but at the end of it, I felt really connected and really connected to life. So that was the sort of the life and the love part. The death part was, a lot of the suffering you meet is meeting people who are saying, I just want to end it all. Or the line I find quite hard to hear sometimes, I just think people would be better off without me around. It's very painful to hear that, isn't it? And some people, will openly confess, I just hate myself. I just hate my life. So, but there have been people who've phoned the helpline and later gone on to commit suicide, and that's what really impacts on us as a team. But we're doing what we can to sort of provide some support and help to stop that. But it's it's a bit like we're up against it. The wave of suffering going on out there. It's a bit like the NHS, and one of the big fears was the NHS getting overwhelmed. Well, I think the mental health services have been overwhelmed for a long time. There's been a tsunami of mental health issues. But it's interesting that doesn't get the same sort of publicity. It's not so well known. But there is a lot of mental suffering going on out there. So what else do I want to say in my edited version? Well, I think I'll just sort of try and underline what I've said and provide, some material for the discussion groups. That for each of us, I'd like to see if we can go back to our perfect vision experiences. I sort of assume in doing this course that that's been emphasized, that the perfect vision is, someone's nodding, good, that those glimpses we have, those insights we have into the way things are, those glimpses of reality, I'm trying to sort of draw out, well, do they have an altruistic aspect? Was there within that a desire to change things? Not only ourselves, but to change the world we live in, to change the interactions we have with one another. So I think that's worth a bit of reflecting on. Now, can we see this sort of thread? Maybe a thread is the wrong word, or a seed, starting to sprout. Can we, if we give our attention to those experiences, have we seen them get stronger? Now, I'm assuming coming here makes those sort of experiences stronger. I assume when Ma Siddhi says at the beginning of the meditation, try and remember your sources of inspiration, what inspires you. I think that's so important in trying to lead some sort of Dharma life, trying to change ourselves. It's keeping those experiences as present as we can, almost sort of recollecting them on a daily basis. Because they're the ones that get us on the cushion when we don't feel like it. They're the ones that get us along to the Buddhist center, again, when maybe we don't feel like it, or there's 1,000 other things that we could be doing. Now, on a lovely evening like this, we've decided to come here, or we've decided to zoom in. What is it that makes us do that? We can't say it's the tea and biscuits anymore, because there aren't any tea and biscuits, unless you provide your own, of course. So, yeah, those experiences we've had, did they have some sort of social aspect to them? Did they have some sort of political aspect to them? Did they have some sort of seed there of our vocation? Have we ended up doing what we're doing because of something like that happened in our lives? How do we see our part in changing society, changing the world? Is that part of how we see a Dharma life? It doesn't mean we all have to be, doing the sort of thing I do, or being nurses and doctors or social workers. There's a myriad ways that we can affect the world. It may be related to our work, it may not be. So how do we see that aspect manifesting in our own lives? Where's our... Because right livelihood, it's not just about the work we do, it is the social and political aspects of life as well. And we're still working those out. For me, it's taken a long time, I think, to find my sort of vocation. And even now, I think this is in some ways the beginning of something. I think that's another aspect. Maybe I can just say this. This might be a good. But in some ways, there's a momentum building, which my sense now is that may carry on sort of beyond this lifetime. I've often struggled with this Buddhist thing of rebirth. It's something a bit out of my experience. But one way I've found into it is this sense that there's a momentum in my life, which in some ways is separate from me. Well, it's both separate from me, but also essentially very much me. And that momentum is building. And when I get in tune with that, it seems, well, that is something which is beyond time and space. It is beyond an individual life. It is something which may well carry on beyond this life. That's a good sort of grenade to throw in. How do you relate to that? Because for a long time, as a Buddhist, I'm not so sure about this rebirth business. Anyway, I'll throw that in. And I'm going to end again with that, just reading out the quote. Again, hopefully this provides some sort of launch pad for any discussion. So even hearing about the lives of ordinary Buddhists can leave one with a distinct impression that their progress towards the spiritual path was inevitable, as though there was a goal implicit in everything they did, a goal that gradually became clearer to them as they experienced more of life and realized what they really wanted to be and do. You might not realize the path your life is taking until you look back on it. But when you do become aware of your purpose, it might seem uncannily as though your life has had a direction of its own, independent of your conscious volition. As that direction emerges into consciousness, with the arising of some degree of clear comprehension, it is intensified and you can pursue it even more vigorously. This might provoke considerable resistance within you, but when you become aware of your higher purpose, you will never be able to forget it entirely.